Mike Pelly, VP for Enrollment.
And I'm Harold Hewitt. My title is Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer.
Okay. What would you say is usually the main reason for increasing tuition? If it's necessary to raise tuition, is there?
So I'm going to start and then Mike's going to help, okay? So the university makes all of the financial decisions, including tuition price level increases on the basis of a multi-year strategic plan. Go all the way back to Jim Doty when he became president. He started the practice of engaging the board in 5-year strategic planning. And there were a number of targets and goals in each plan. And those included specific financial information. So you start with the academic objective. And because, we're a mission-driven nonprofit organization, so it's really the academic mission of the organization that determines how we're going to spend and therefore what kind of revenue targets we need to set, right? What does that all got to do with tuition, okay? Well, we very carefully calculate the cost of building out these programs. And we look at all of the sources of revenue, all the expenses associated with the organization, and then we target knowing that 75% of revenue to build out these programs is coming from net tuition, both graduate and undergraduate. We target then the tuition price levels by program. Tuition price is very complicated at Chapman because in the graduate area in particular, programs are priced differently. They're not the same. All undergraduate tuition is offered at the same price, okay? So we have a very complicated, rigorous financial planning tool that we use in order to be able to forecast accurately how much we should consider increasing tuition price in order to be able to fund the board level commitments to the future of the institution. One of the biggest claims on institutional revenue is, in fact, financial aid. So if you wouldn't mind, Mike, could you talk about how you figure into this?
Yeah, and before I get into the financial aid expense, I want to add one thing. These new programs that we're developing also have a very ripe job market. And so when the board looks at the future of Chapman and our offerings, they often are thinking about providing services for students, not just for the community, but being able to provide a productive workforce. So these programs in health sciences with an aging demographic is a perfect time for us to be graduating students who can get jobs. As Harold mentioned though, one of the biggest expense, not the largest expense, is financial aid, is redirecting funds back into student scholarships. The strategic plan that you just talked about had to do with our most recent initiative on health sciences. You mentioned 30 years ago when, I guess, I didn't know that statistic, you said in 1987 is when the first time colleges were considered expensive. I've never heard that before, but coincidentally around the same time, soon after I started here, one of the strategic plans at the time was a focus on academics, on improving student quality. And in my opinion, one of the pivotal moves we made in Chapman's history is when President Doty at the time decided to move from a Division II and I athletics program, where we were directing a lot of our scholarship funds towards athletics, and moving to Division III, ironically adding football for school spirit, but that's not really related, and taking those monies and redirecting them into scholarships for student talent. And we wanted to increase the caliber of our student body. So a lot of our funding is redirected back into merit scholarships or need-based financial aid. And matter of fact, over $100 million a year of Chapman funds go towards student funding, student financial aid. And there's two main sources. There's need-based financial aid. You fill out the FAFSA and you qualify for aid. It's both state and federal aid, but a lot of it is Chapman aid in the form of Chapman grant. And then the other big one is the merit scholarships. I'm assuming both of you might receive merit scholarships. And that's coming from, that's my budget. It's part of that $100+ million a year we spend. So a huge part of our expenses is actually student scholarships. So when you see tuition going up, you have to remember so does financial aid, and the two areas that get the majority of the financial aid are the students with the highest need and the students with the highest merit.
So one thing that's really frustrating about trying to answer these questions, particularly in a compressed time format, is on the one hand, answers seem very simple, and on the other hand, they're really complicated, and it's almost case by case. So I'm going to pick an example. Let's try to see if it's helpful. Okay, let's talk about the Musco Center for the Arts and the anticipated impact on the College of Performing Arts. Okay, so the Musco Center for the Arts is almost 100% externally donor funded, and in that case, we had a donor actually step forward and say, you know, Memorial is not the proper venue for a state-of-the-art performing arts program. So one thing that Chapman lacks is a venue that is equivalent to the quality of the academic program that you're trying to build. The other thing that Chapman lacks is a facility that would serve as a town gown relationship builder. So every university is surrounded by some kind of community, and you always try to build goodwill and so on. And this donor has seen other institutions, you all know who it is, and realized that we were deficient in this area and said, I'm going to provide a leadership gift. And let's try to raise all the cash so it doesn't drain the university, right?
So naturally speaking, we wanted to try to combine our resources with state resources and federal resources, and loans are a big part of it as well. But generally speaking, with our financial aid office, one of the biggest jobs they have is administering the over $100 million of Chapman-funded scholarships and grants, as well as being good stewards for state funds and federal funds. It's, you know, we have to be in compliance with federal and state laws when we distribute those funds, and that's why we have to follow the rules of what the FAFSA says. We, over 85% of our students are on financial aid, so I mean it's more important than anything else in the majority of our families. A case that's literally on my desk right now is a student who feels like financial aid is giving them the runaround. It's a long, complex case, but this student is getting a lot of federal and state aid as well, but has also, there's some complicated cases about independent versus dependent status. Anyway, we are the stewards of these federal and state funds. Some new information became available about whether or not the student should be classified as dependent versus independent. And feels like the student really, I mean, we're asking for some very specific information because we have to literally examine every document that the federal regulations require us to do. And he feels like he's getting the runaround, but this is our responsibility. I mean, we are spending federal and state funds to do this, and if we are out of compliance, we run the risk of losing all eligibility for federal and state aid. So we take the job really seriously. It's regulatory heavy by design, because there's hundreds of millions of dollars in federal financial aid every year. So if we did our job sloppily and we didn't spend the money wisely or judiciously, we would be out of compliance.
Okay.
Here's the bottom line. 65% of the expenses of the institution are personnel. Okay? And if you protect academic freedom and believe in tenure, then the majority of that 65% is for faculty. If faculty are protected by tenure, you can't fire them. So all these claims that we should be doing this fabulous job of cutting our expenses, the only way we could have a material effect on the expense base would be to mess with faculty. Okay, we don't want to do that. I mean, we're hiring faculty to maintain our student-faculty ratio. It's part of what we believe is a critical indicator of quality, right? So when you look at the expenses of the institution, there is no simple solution for reducing. So the way you level all this out, the way you grow and invest in new programs, and the way you take care of the good people who are here, right, is primarily through that tuition revenue. We're converting adjunct positions into full-time teaching positions. These are non-tenure track, but full-time. And the expectation of those positions is that they will teach. They don't have the significant research expectations of a tenure track faculty member. And we're hoping that this is perceived by many as more equitable and fair treatment, right? So it's more expensive for us, and we're systematically doing it every year. We're adding more and more and more. So we're trying to reduce adjunct and flip over to full-time, because we accept the arguments that are being made publicly about the fact that a core portion of your teaching faculty are not eligible for benefits, for example.
Yeah.
Right? So because everything in budget operations is a balancing act, it's not that we can just go and do it overnight. right? Because it's a very significant set of numbers, but we're steadily making progress.
Is it expensive to make an adjunct professor a full-time professor? Is that
It's
costly?
expensive primarily, yeah, it is. It's both in terms of the base salary and also in terms of the benefits that we want to extend.
Being able to hire adjuncts gives us a pipeline of a test run, if you will, for future full-time professors. But think about film. Film is a great example, but doesn't really fit the traditional academic areas of social sciences or humanities. You could hire a full-time faculty member, and the teaching load could be, let's say it's a 3-3 where they teach 3 classes each term, or you could hire 3 adjuncts who have specialties and are working professions in the industry and can come down and really work specifically about industry standard, real-time issues that benefit the students. Less theory. But the problem is the Dodge College would be, in the traditional higher ed model, would be ridiculed for having too many adjuncts, but sometimes those adjuncts, being working professionals, are ones who are actually the folks who are hiring our students. So it doesn't work in all fields, especially in Dodge. Not to say that they're better, they bring a skill set, a real-time working in the profession. Also, they help us back to the prestige factor. These are professionals who are working in the industry who choose to teach at Chapman. And they're going to be hiring a talent pool, our students, who have a chance to meet them in class, but work on real projects that are happening in real time. But in the traditional accreditation world in which we live, having too many adjuncts is considered a bad thing. So ironically, in this case, the traditional model of history or psychology or philosophy, we have tenure track professors, that's kind of the model in which accreditation and review was built on. But it doesn't really translate to things like Dodge College. But we have to try to convert some of the Dodge College faculty to full-time as well. Frankly, it's probably equally as expensive, and you would know more about this than I would, it's probably equally as expensive to hire a full-time professor in Dodge than it would be to hire 3 or 4 part-timers and literally send a limo service to LA every time they come down to campus and bring them to class and whisk them home and make it very convenient for them to come down to Orange County. In the end, all those expenses associated with transportation and everything else probably would be less because you're not paying benefits. But the question is, what happens in the classroom? In the classroom, you mentioned it yourself, Spencer, you're getting real-time access to movies and scripts and TV shows.
Yep.
So we do a good job. I think we do a good job balancing it, but it doesn't work in every field.